Paul, welcome back to Illinois. Your lady friend Sally is still wreaking havoc down in the Gulf of Mexico and in the southeast. And this is part of my addendum series, and I want to make an addendum to what we said back in 1997. This is what, 23 years ago, concerning the Dead Sea Scrolls. That you and I were the first two people to come publicly and expose the Dead Sea Scrolls as modern forgeries.
Right.
Now there was no one before us that made that declaration.
No, nobody even dared.
Nobody dared, because it was a cash cow.
Yes.
For BAR magazine, Herschel Shanks, and all these people were making a lot of money on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Sure.
And but I think that Dr. John Strugnow, he had his suspicion because he noted that all of the handwriting was the same, this perfect Hebrew block script.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew enough about Hebrew to know that there was no Hebrew script back then.
Right.
There's what, 4 characters from Petra that are in the modern day Hebrew script.
Right.
That's it, 4. And the Hebrew of the Dead Sea Scrolls is clearly a Latin syntax.
Well, no wonder the Catholic Church endorses the Dead Sea Scrolls. Why not?
And
that tells you why the Pope and all, they all endorse that, of course.
And I can't prove, as somebody that studied ancient languages for over 30 years, I cannot show you or prove to you at all that Hebrew was ever a spoken language before like 1200 AD, 1100 AD or so.
Well, I mean, you start seeing the texts, you know, the Talmud, Torahs and all that. But the oldest one we have is probably from the 800s or something, around 900 AD.
Yeah, I go 700 just to give myself some cushion.
Give yourself some cushion and all that, but nothing like that. Now, when you see these archaeological artifacts written in the old Phoenician script, they'll say, "Oh, this is a Hebrew text." Well,
or they'll call it Paleo-Hebrew.
Paleo-Hebrew, and then write it on there. But the vocabulary is just is the typical vocabulary used by the Phoenicians and the Syrians and all the people in Palestine that lived there. And later, when it became a commercial language, it became known as Aramaic. But, I mean, this is what was spoken. You know, basically, it's different Semitic dialects, but this block Hebrew and this language that's passed on today was never spoken. And it has a Latin syntax, so it was done after the Roman Empire.
So it's got compound words in it, and it's got real nice prefixes and suffixes.
Beautiful.
And since we did that, though, a few years later, some other guys came up with the same conclusions, going a different direction.
Yeah, they have. And
then since then, there's been other people that have gone through, and most recent is that the medium and the ink itself is all modern.
Well, this is the thing is, you know, basically what I was basing it on, it was just, you know, the history and, you know, the conditions, you know, the fact that papyrus is not easy to come by. Even vermilion in the Middle Ages, you had to be of nobility, and you had to have a lot of money and clout to even have that. And during Roman times, it was only a Roman magistrate or a governor and his scribes that had access to papyrus. It wasn't like you could go to the store, "Hey, let me buy a roll of papyrus."
Or a roll of sheepskin.
A roll of sheepskin, because it would probably cost you what you made in an entire year just to have that if you were an ordinary, you know, person. Tradesman or whatever. But the ink in the desert, well, first of all, it costs a lot to get ink, and then in those arid conditions out there, it just didn't make sense. And the languages I based on that. But now we have science and technology that can go a step further with forensics.
Mm-hmm. And
that's what that one group German company did, is they tested some, and they've proven that the ink was modern. Probably, when they say modern, probably
100 years,
100 to 200 maximum,
years,
not from ancient time, antiquity times. And that's what they busted is on, that the ink was not. So, and then I guess some in the Smithsonian they found too. They done some tests.
Just recently. Like 6 months ago, yeah.
Same thing. Oh, well, the ink is fake. Well, these are fake and then others are real. No, I guarantee if they tested every single one of them,
they're all forgeries.
They're all going to be forgeries, but that is not going to happen. The Israeli government's not going to allow that, and definitely the Vatican, whatever they have, are not going to allow that because they have been massive cash grabs.
And the Episcopalians, too, that have funded a bunch of the stuff, too.
Sure, they're not going to allow that.
And another thing, too, that you pointed out. Now, you made an addendum movie to the Dead Sea Scrolls, 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was a great video. It was like 15 minutes long.
Right.
And it was just astounding the way you presented that. And what you in surmisation, what you did is you showed ancient text of writing, and the words were all bunched up together.
Right.
And there was no wasted space.
I used Semitic texts from the Middle East, dating back to 700 BC up to 400 BC, on papyrus that were written. A lot of them were done by merchants and orders, and also decrees. And you could tell that every single inch of space, millimeter of space, was used by writing. If you made a mistake, you wrote over it. You know, you didn't have whiteout and all that. You just wrote over it because you couldn't just pull out another piece of papyrus or something because it was expensive. And then going to later, the wood shavings that were found in Vindalanda.
Yeah, they're writing on wood shavings.
Yeah, well, the Romans wrote on, up in England, they obviously papyrus was just too expensive to transport, so they were able to create something similar out of wood shavings up in England, and they wrote on that too. And when you look at those, I mean, it's just bunched up cursive Latin. But when you see the Dead Sea Scrolls,
it's just this perfect straight line,
double spaced,
and that's the key. It's double spaced.
Double spaced, like a college paper on a typewriter. We want it double spaced, and it's like, well, wait a minute, that didn't make sense.
And I think Strugnell had his suspicions about that too.
That was ridiculous. This double spacing on them in this perfect block Hebrew script with medieval Latin syntax. I mean, it was obviously something that was modern.
Because back then, something as small as a bubblegum wrapper would have never been thrown away.
Because I think they were created, I had my suspicions, giving it the benefit of the doubt that he dated back to the Crusades. But now with the tests that were made, it's a lot more modern. And I believe it must have been done in the late 1800s or the turn of the last century. And we would know for what reason, when you...
And now... people say, oh, the Essenes, but no. Dr. Strugnell proved that there's only one Essene.
Yeah, whoever wrote those, it was all written by
one person. And how did they keep their ink dry? I mean, wet is beyond me. That's one of the most arid and torrid places on the planet, 215 feet below sea level.
I think whoever the forger was one that knew how to, was a pretty good scribe and knew how to do it, and they were hired by the Zionists or whoever, had
Eastern Europeans.
And that's what he did for years. He just wrote them very busily, and then they just had to put them somewhere where they would age. I mean, that's real easy to do. It's not hard. And then place them at the right place at the right time for them to be discovered, which leads another thing to the Qumran caves. When we're going back to the 1800s, where there were many archaeological expeditions in that area, nobody found anything like that.
No. And people were all over that area.
People all over, and especially two famous historical figures. Gertrude Bell. She was a British socialite, a wealthy woman that traveled throughout the whole Middle East. And then the famous Lawrence of Arabia, when he was very young, graduate student, he dug and traveled throughout that whole area there with Gertrude Bell, looking for some Nabatean treasures, and they scoured that whole Qumran area. And if anybody would have found that and been excited, it would have been Lawrence. Definitely, like, I found some ancient text here from biblical times. He would have been a hero, but he didn't find anything.
But and Lawrence of Arabia, he had his men, some of his spies, stationed in the Qumran caves.
Then during World War I, a decade or so later, when he led the Arab revolt, as they were pushing up against the Turks, they camped out in the Qumran caves and raided the Turks in that area. And of course, there was nothing found either. And then later on, suspiciously, Gertrude Bell died of a overdose of pills, and sometime suspicious death. And in the late 1920s or mid to late 1920s, she passed away. And then in 1937, I believe, Lawrence died suspicious of a motorcycle accident.
I can't remember exactly when.
And
but
these would have been the two named people that, had they lived in 1948,
they would have figured it out.
And they said this Dead Sea Scrolls come out, they would have busted that right there. But they weren't alive to do that, so this is some suspicious things about.
And then Paul and Harry come along, 70 years later, and and then just bust it wide open. But I was surprised that other people followed suit and they made their own discoveries, and they were not working with us. They did not know of our material, and they were working in Russia. It was Russia was the first guys. Yeah. There was a duo like me and you, but over in Russia, and they were the first ones, and they came to their conclusions probably about 2002, I believe.
Yes, there was a group over there, like pretty much.
And then another group in 2007, and then others after 2010, and now there's like several people. And you can go on our videos and people say that Harry and Paul were first.
Yeah.
Harry and Paul were the first.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing
our fans know who was first on the line.
The whole thing is, I was interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I wanted to read their content.
Me too.
And historically, and Harry had these books from Poland and everything, and I said, let me look at these and all that. And then when I started looking at them, I'm like, what is that? I said, are you serious? What is this here? This is not ancient, It's this. Are you serious? Is this the Dead Sea Scrolls? Are you serious? I thought it was just somebody.
It's actually better than medieval English, or
I was
Castilian.
Like, this is not ancient. This perfect block Hebrew script. And then, of course, at that time, the double spacing.
That came later, yeah.
That came later, like even more ridiculous because I've had more experience looking at it. But I said, this is not ancient. And of course, all these biblical magazines and the Vatican and all that, like they're making such a big deal over it. Well, I know what the big secret is. That no, it's not with the information that's on it. It's the fact that they're recent, and they're not from ancient antiquity. The thing is, when I started targeting the block Hebrew, well, there's another find that's not ancient, that I don't believe is real either, which are called the Nag Hammadi works. It's supposedly done by Gnostics. And the nice thing about him is they actually write in that ancient Aramaic type script, the Old Greek. But I don't believe they're real either. But now what they're saying is they're showing something. Oh, here's a sample of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's actually something out of the Nag Hammadi find. Mm-hmm. So now they're trying to get rid of the block Hebrew and show you the older type scripts and say, oh, here's a page of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they're trying to do that.
Well, and then you have the Damascus Scroll, which is questionable. And I believe that me or you, one of us, predicted back in '97 that they were going to find more Dead Sea Scrolls. And they did.
Oh, of course.
They did. They did find more Dead Sea Scrolls.
Well, didn't we predict that they were going to find more Mayan codices, too?
And they did that, too.
That happened, too.
And these are predictions that we made over 20 years ago.
Yeah, the new codices, imperfect syntax, of course.
But people buy into stuff, man. People buy into it because somebody they like is saying it, or this or that. I'll tell you another one that people bought into was the Emerald Tablets. The Emerald Tablets.
Oh, that green one with Toth with that writing on it?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
And these people, evidently, they've never seen a piece of emerald and tried to write on it or scratch on it with anything.
Well, isn't it like a
It's
relief?
super hard, and it's...
Bob relief, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's a great...
No, some of it is, but the letter scratching in it just looks horrible. And nobody knows where they're at. They only exist online. They're no museum.
I've never heard of it or seen it. I mean, I've never actually seen anything like that, other than on the internet.
It's exclusive to the internet.
Yeah.
And which to me is absolutely hilarious that so many people buy into it, because I have people sending me emails saying, Harry, you and Paul need to decipher this. You guys need to have another look at this, Harry. You and Paul need to have another look at this. And we're like, what for? Show me the real tablet. Let me send it into forensics, our forensics lab, our favorite forensics lab.
Yes.
And by the way, and then if it comes out to, yeah, we'll look at it. We'll look at it. But it ain't never going to happen. It ain't never going to happen. And now, and I predicted this years ago, that there'd be another emerald tablet pop up on the scene, and sure enough, there was. Now there's 3 instead of 2. Or
where they find them all. I mean, this is amazing.
And who in the world would take an actual piece of emerald that was nice color and scratch it, ruin it by scratching letters in it? I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
No, that's a...
And another one that people fall for all the time is the Book of Enoch.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm sitting there going, hey, man, I have proven that the Book of Enoch is a pseudepigraph. It is a bogus book. It is a fake book. But since it's a matter, you can't really say it's a fake book. It's a pseudepigraph. In other words, the information in it is just all bogus. But it has matter. It has time and space in it.
From the 1800s, earliest?
Yeah, well, they changed. They changed. And then they say that, oh, Scaliger said that when he was translating the Book of Enoch, that he knew that it was bogus. But I don't even have any record that Scaliger ever even had a copy, a manuscript of the Book of Enoch.
No.
And it just doesn't make any sense at all. But people eat it up. And that's, I can't remember which book. Oh, it was in I think Into the Maw of the Great Abyss that I show the pseudepigraphs and what they are. That's one of them. And maybe JUDAICA. But these people, they don't know how to determine to eat that up. They don't know how to determine fact from fiction.
No. And that's all in beautiful English.
Yeah. And no, it's in the King's English. It's in the King's English. Like it's you know, mine had verses in it. Remember?
Yeah.
And a lot of guys that are alleged historians, they go back to quoting Josephus. They use Josephus as a reference, and I proved that 30 years ago was bogus.
And half of the vocabulary that's in King's English didn't even exist in ancient times.
Yeah, of course. But these people that refer to Josephus, they never read the preface and the introduction.
No.
And that's all they got to do.
Like, and it cracks me up when I watch some of these historical shows while the History Channel's told garbage. But
yeah,
I mean, it's like, according to the historian Josephus, and I'm like, oh no.
Okay, this might be a little difficult for me to convey. I'm not sure how to present it. I'm just going to do my best to walk you through this, because we're in Encyclopedia Judaica, and this is in volume 6, page 1261. And you have to know how to look up things in Encyclopedia Judaica. Now we are in the F section, fiction, and we're looking at Hebrew fiction. And this is going to be a little heavy for some of you, because I've been privy to this over 30 years, okay? And I would have never thought in my wildest dreams that so much of today's Hebrew fiction would be as popular as it has become. And we're going to look at some of it, and I'm going to share with you what I know, what I have known for decades, and many scholars know this already. They see right through it. But now we have so many pseudo scholars out there that are promoting fiction as real, and like I invented before, pseudo facts create pseudo news, or what we know as today as fake news. Well, we have other things that are fake as well, and now we're going to look at some of it. The story of Talmudic commentary literature. Narrative creative writing has been a constant in Hebrew literature and can be found in every period of culture. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to scroll down here a little bit. A great part of the narratives preserved in the commentary developed the biblical story to conform to the exegetical purposes of the Talmudic scholars. And here we go, and remember, we're in Hebrew fiction, and we're talking about the Bar Kokhba War. The narrative, creative impulse did not disappear. It only lacked intellectual status as a separate, independent vehicle of expression. The Hebrew story in the Middle Ages opens, therefore, with the slow process of the genre achieving these aims, a separate status and an independent literary form. Go figure. But we're just getting going. Now this is the bottom of page 1262. Other authors attempted to retell the biblical story in wider scope. The author of Jossipon, 10th century Italy, dedicated most of his work to the war against the Romans and the destruction of the Second Temple. The work, however, starts with a short recapitulation of this history told in a medieval fictional style. The more ambitious author of the Book of Jasher, probably 11th century Spain, retells at great length the story from the creation to the time of the judges. For example, the whole story of the Pentateuch. It is the most complete example of this type of medieval writing using biblical motifs, agadic material, and fictional innovations to weave a new and captivating story. The literary scope of the work was unequaled by any later medieval writing. The authors of Jossipon, which we're gonna see all about this guy here. You're gonna know everything about Jossipon. I'm sure many of you have never heard of this fellow. And the Book of Jasher added another aspect to the medieval story about biblical times. These authors and others therefore developed a system of synchronization and analogy to establish a connection between non-Jewish stories and biblical heroes and chronology. The reawakening of the Apocrypha and PSEUDEPIGRAPHA. This literature was preserved in Greek, Latin, and other languages, most likely Aramaic, and only recently have some Hebrew originals been found. Well, why is that? Perhaps the Hebrew, they didn't have time enough to make it, did they? The themes, ideas, and stories in the Book of Jubilees, in the different versions of the Book of Enoch, in Tobit, Judith, and even in the historical Book of Maccabees are hardly mentioned. The author also used the Mr. Satan motif from the books of Enoch and Jubilees. His adaptation of the Bible story is deeply influenced by this long disregarded or suppressed literature. So now again, I'm showing you the definition here of pseudepigrapha from my 1955 Oxford Dictionary. Pseudo, to inscribe, see epigraph, a collective term for books or writings bearing a false title or ascribed to another than the true author, specifically applied to certain these guys' writings, ascribed to various patriarchs and prophets of the Old Testament. See also in anglicized form, pseudepigraph, pseudepigraphal, pseudepigraphic, pseudepigraphical, on and on, pertaining to or having the character of spurious, false ascription of authorship. In other words, they're fake books. But we're going to go into it a little bit deeper. When you go into Wikipedia, which I don't often use, this is a fake guy here, Pseudo Dionysius. Well, we don't know what he looked like. And this is pretty good, though. Also anglicized this right here, falsely attributed works. And right here you see Book of Enoch, Book of Jubilees. Now we're going to scroll down a little bit here. Just bear with me. Just going to scroll down. Anybody can look this up. It's all right underneath your nose. All you got to do is look at it. And but the late appearing Gospel of Barnabas, which I do believe is pretty good. This guy, Pseudo-Apollius, 5th century herbal ascribed to Apollius. It's fake stuff. There's also a category of modern pseudepigrapha. Now, if you scroll over that, it comes up as refer to pseudepigrapha of recent origin. Any book written in the style of the books of the Bible or other religious scriptures and claiming to be of similar age but written much later. Modern period. And that's why a lot of these books, like Book of Enoch, Jasher, Jubilees, a lot of them, they're written down in like chapter and verse like they are in the Bible. And here you have Pseudo-Philo, which I busted Philo years ago. And here, just as plain as day, Ethiopic Book of Enoch, Slavonic, second book of Enoch, book of Jubilees. But they don't have the book of Jasher in here. Now if we continue to scroll down, we see also list of Old Testament pseudepigrapha, false attribution, false document. You don't have to make it up. Now we're still in volume 6 of Encyclopedia Judaica. This comes from page 795. Enoch, Ethiopic book of Enoch, known as the Enoch 1 or 1 Enoch. Now I want to point out something. That now the book of Enoch listed in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but none of my books printed in the 1950s, early 60s have the book of Enoch listed in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when I ordered books from Russia and Poland and Hungary and I think Yugoslavia, none of those books had anything in them concerning the Dead Sea Scrolls finding of the book of Enoch. It wasn't up until the late 60s, early 70s. Now if somebody can find a book printed in like 1959, 1958, that has the book of Enoch listed in there as being formed of the Dead Sea Scrolls, I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it. But as far as I know, now, fiction is infinite. Like once you start believing this, and then you have to also believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls are all real, which they're not. They're just present-day forgeries from the 1800s probably or so. And it's just you have to you keep believing more and more and more bullcrap, basically bovine manure. That's all it is. And so that's what we're going to look at. Because once you're on the bovine train, the bovine manure train, then the sky is the limit. Just make it up as you go. And anything that you want to believe in, you can. You can find stuff on it now online. The sources are unlimited. Here we go, abbreviated Enoch 1, one of the most important of the apocalyptic works, dating from the period of the Second Temple. Well, was that the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran? It is named after the biblical Enoch, son of Jared, walked with God and God took him up, okay? Oh dear, it's just so much. It continues with Enoch's journey through the universe. Hills of darkness, rivers of fire, the abode of the spirits, the place of the great future judgment, Judgment Day, the elect one, the book of the courses of the heavenly luminaries. This book is entirely separate and distinct from the preceding one, and it shows the nature of the true calendar of 364 days per year. Boy, at 52 weeks, well, I guess that'd have to be post the Gregorian calendar, wouldn't it? Yeah, I'm just saying, once you start believing crap, you can just make it up as you go, and there's no one there to stop you. The sky is the limit. This comes from page 796. The book of Noah, the story of Noah's birth, similar in content to Genesis Apocrypha, the book of Noah found at Qumran. Well, there's another one that just popped up on the scene. Here we go. In its view of the role of Enoch and its solar calendar and its affinities with the book of Jubilees. Well, how many times do you have to see that the book of Jubilees is pseudepigrapha? And I'm just saying, and the modern book of Jubilees is horribly written, And similar ideas are found in the later pseudepigraphic Mishratic literature. Just make it up as you go, and everything's going to be fine. The final chapter is both ideologically and linguistically close to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the term righteous shoot. It is also common in the writings of this sect. The book of Enoch had tremendous influence, it still does today, from it, or at any rate, through it, the Manual of Discipline received the solar calendar and is also served as exemplar for the composition of the burgeoning apocalyptic literary genre. In the Ethiopic church, it is still considered canonical. The Book of Enoch became known again in Europe only in the 18th century when James Bruce brought parts of it from Ethiopia. In the 19th century, Dahlman, who is also responsible for the chapter divisions, and later Charles, disseminated it in the world of Western scholarship. The original language of the Book of Enoch was, according to, Hebrew, but Hebrew is a modern language. It's medieval. Hebrew was only found to be written in like 650, 700, and still was not spoken until like 800, 750, 900 AD. But the fragments of the book found in Qumran were all in Aramaic. Yes, sir. Let's just make it up as we go. This comes from page 797, known as 2 Enoch. Book of Secrets of Enoch. Apocryphal work translated in the 10th or 11th century from Greek into Slavonic. The dating is deduced from the evidence of certain linguistic peculiarities, grammatical tricks. Grammatical tricks. The first complete edition of the work was published by Popov in 1880. It was edited and studied by Sokolov, who made a special examination of the quotations from old Russian literature it contains. Yes, sir. The Slavonic Book of Enoch begins with Enoch's account of his journey on the wings of angels through the 7 heavens. This account, which contains astronomical information and descriptions of various classes of obedient and rebellious angels, recalls, despite considerable differences in detail, similar passages to the Ethiopic Book of Enoch. So, how do you explain the contradictions between first and second book? Just make it up as you go. That's all you got to do. To describe in the works of heaven and earth, as well as disquisitions on various other topics, and commands Enoch to record these in 360 books. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a lot of writing for one guy. This comes from page 798. Same book, volume 6, Encyclopedia Judaica. Various hypotheses have been put forward on the origin of the Slavonic Book of Enoch. Well, just make it up as you go. And the influences discernible in it. There are unmistakable echoes of Christian doctrine in the long recension, but only doubtful ones, or none at all, in the short. If, as seems probable, the latter text is comparatively free from interpolation, there does not appear to be any firm ground for maintaining, as Valiant does, that the work originated in a Christian melee. It is therefore a possibility that some portions of the Slavonic Book of Enoch, or the whole of it, reflect the views of a Jewish sect which was heterodox in rabbinic eyes. In this connection, it may be asked if the story of Melchizedek, however you want to say it, recounted in this work also belongs to the lore of this sect, to the folklore of this sect. Just stories, just made up stories. Some portions of the Slavonic Book of Enoch show Iranian influences. Well, I wonder why that. Oh, gosh, let's just make it up as you go. Just make it up as you go. And here's the rest of it. We're just getting going good. Chronologically, the Slavonic Book of Enoch comes after the Ethiopic Book of Enoch. But, yeah, what, 1,000 years after? Would you say? How many years after? Just make it up. Now we'll come to another one of my all-time favorites. The complete works of Josephus. And this isn't my first one. This is like my third or fourth Josephus book. I get them, and then I mark them up, and then I give them away to people. And just because they're fun. And it's a hard read, and it's 638 pages of 4-column per page open. So if you're counting, this is a page, that would mean there's over 2,550 pages of text in this book. And gosh knows how many words would be involved with that. So Josephus, for being so obscure, is probably the most published, printed. There's more of his material than anybody else I know. And I tend to study a lot of ancient history. But there's a few problems in here, which we're going to look at. And the book is about a little bit over 1.5 inches thick. And if it's going to be over 2,500 pages of that kind of text, but each page is only 1. The least you can do for yourself is read the foreword and the introduction. Now, in a lot of cases, that can save you the trouble of reading a lot of the book. Just saying. So now we're going to look at Josephus, and it's not like I just woke up out of bed one day and decided I was going to study Josephus. My father had the Zondervan book. Now, Kregel is a publications, is a division of Zondervan today, and my father had this on the shelf back in the 60s. So I kind of grew up with it. Every now and then I would grab the book and look at it, but it was real hard to read because the print was much smaller, and it was kind of laid out different. I haven't seen one of those Josephuses in several years, but it had the striped dust cover to it. So some of you may have remembered the old Josephus books that had the black and white, or excuse me, the gray and white striped book dust jacket on it. So now we're going to look at Josephus. I'm going to begin my take on Flavius Josephus by showing you the table of contents. Life of Flavius Josephus, Antiquities of, right here. And it starts off with creation to the death of Isaac, Exodus out of Egypt, Moses, Elisa. But the first problem is that this word right here first appears in the King James Bible in 2 Kings chapter 16. Way down the line. None of these guys are ever referred to as being this. They are all called Israelites. And this is the first problem that I've got. So when this word right here appears in 2 Kings 16:6, I believe it is, they are at war with the allies of the Israelites. So why do people believe that the Israelites and this right here is the same? I don't know. I don't get it. They're all over the place. And we're just going to scroll down. Alexander the Great to the death of Judas Maccabeus. And a lot of this could have been taken from the Bible or some other authors, ancient authors at that time. See, Josephus, he had a library card, and he had a bookstore right down the street too. And he had time to read all of these books and then write 2,500 pages in Aramaic and then 2,500 pages in Greek. But we're going to look at it here in a minute. And here I'm talking about Herod the Great. Watch out for Herod the Great. Herod wasn't great. He didn't do anything except refurbish the temple. He didn't have vast minions or anything. I think it's just crazy to call Herod great. What did he do? This is the second page of the contents. So slowly scroll down here, right here. Testimonies of Josephus concerning this in the appendix. Testimonies of Josephus concerning Jesus Christ, John the Baptist, and James the Just vindicated. But it's just like one or two sentences, and there's a lot of controversy. We'll look at it. Tacitus' account of the origin of this nation and of the particulars of the last war, that the former was probably written in opposition to Josephus' Antiquities, and that the latter was certainly almost all directly taken from Josephus' history of the Jewish war. I think it was the other way around. Copy of the books of the Old Testament used by Josephus in his Antiquities was the ancient collection or library made by Nehemiah, which was like what? Other copies that still exist. It was what, 400 years? Yeah, he was using books that were printed 400 years before he was even around. Oh, come on. This is pretty interesting. Of the learned, this fellow here, wherein the history of the family of Herod by Flavius Josephus is vindicated, and that history is shown to be agreeable to ancient coins. Now remember, back in 1997, in my lecture, I explained to you how they're going to start using ancient coins. But see, I had clues. I had more clues because I was a collector of ancient coins, been doing it for years. And so here we see. Now, list of ancient testimonies and records cited by Josephus and of coins referred to in the notes, confirming or illustrating his history. So they are doing, and they have been doing, exactly what I tried to explain over 20 years ago. They're using these fake ancient coins to supply them with history to back it up, because this is, like I said, in the Hebrew fiction, they needed things more solid. They needed more solid items to substantiate their bogus history in the fiction, the Hebrew fiction. So what better way to do it than with the coins? And that's why you have the only thing that backs up the Bar Kokhba war is the coins. Now we get to the foreword. Okay, Josephus was born in 37 AD and died sometime after AD 100. Now, we have a lot of people, a lot of ancient historians that are a lot more obscure than Flavius Josephus, and we know the date when they were born and the date when they died. And died sometime after 100. Now, a man, a historian he was a priest, he was a general, and he was a writer. He wrote 2,500 pages in Aramaic, and he wrote 2,500 pages in Greek, and he read hundreds of books, and we don't know when he died. We don't know when he died, actually. Psh, you got me. There's another hole. I like this. The young Joseph was precocious, and when he was only 14, rabbis came to him for advice. Yeah, these rabbis. At the age of 16, he set himself to learn at first hand the tenets of the three major sects of Judaism, proposing to spend some time as a member of each group. He began by adopting the ascetic life under the influence of Bannus. Now, you got to watch this close. It would seem from the description that Bannus was an Essene, and he continued for 3 years. Okay, so Bannus is an Essene, and Josephus was with him for 3 years. At the age of 19, Josephus joined the Pharisees and remained in that sect for the rest of his life. Obviously, this does not allow time for a careful consideration of the Sadducees, nor, for that matter, any other personal experiences of the Pharisees, unless, of course, we deduct time spent on studying the Pharisees from the 3 years under Bannus. It is possible that Josephus means for us to understand that he spent a year on each of 3 sects and then made his decision. Okay? And his information on the Essenes seems to be dependent on others, particularly Philo, which I've already busted Philo. But why would he trust Philo? That book probably didn't even exist back then. When he was working with an Essene for 3 years, why don't you just take this guy Bannus' word for it? Why don't you just learn from it? Come on. And then in 64, he was at 26, went to Rome. So he traveled everywhere. He was everywhere, but he had time to write over 5,000 pages of ancient text in Aramaic and Greek. His goal was achieved with the aid of the Jewish actor Altarus and the emperor's wife Pompeia, from whom Josephus calls God-fearing. God-fearing. Nero's wife, Pompeia, she was a murderous, backstabbing whore. She was terrible, horrible person. God-fearing? Not so, man, not so. This guy is the only person, Josephus is the only person that calls her God-fearing. Next, Josephus' first literary work was The Wars of the Jews, published in the closing years of the reign of Vespasian, which would be 70s AD. Since that time, Josephus was not confident in his ability to write in good Greek style. He composed the work first in Aramaic. According to his own word, he translated it into Greek. This must be the only ancient inscription or ancient text that we have that is first composed in Aramaic and then into Greek. Scholars, however, can find little trace of translation style and are inclined to the view that Josephus rewrote the book or probably had other writers work on it in Greek. The Wars of the Jews was written under the commission of the emperor and can be looked upon as a bit of propaganda. His Antiquities was published about 15 years later in AD 93. It is obviously patterned after the Roman antiquities of Dionysius of Halicarnassus, published a century earlier. And I love Dionysius of Halicarnassus, and I don't see any similarities at all. That, to me, is... The titles are markedly similar. Romaic archaeology, Judaic archaeology. Well, I wonder why. I wonder why. And they both had 20 books. Okay. Josephus is no longer writing by commission of the emperor, for the emperor's name occurs only once, and to us to date it. And the dedication is to this handsome fellow. But this was just a common name. We're not even sure who this guy was. There's one mentioned in the New Testament, in what, Philippians, I believe? But we don't know if it was the same guy. Probably not. For the most part, Josephus has drawn his material from the Bible. Oh, yeah. The Greek version, or Septuagint, to which he has added some legendary material and some details from secular historians. Whew. Let's go to the next page. The relationship of Josephus to the New Testament documents has been frequently discussed, and this brief foreword is not the place to enter into the discussion. Okay? Josephus' reference to Jesus Christ is found in the Antiquities in this right here. It's just one line. Now, catch this. Most modern scholars would deny the authenticity of the passage, claiming either that it was wholly a Christian interpolation or addition, or that it was worked over by Christian hands. The Christians got their little hands on it and they changed. But most scholars would deny the authenticity. I would deny the authenticity of the entire book. Oh, 3,000 pages of it. The passage concerning John the Baptist occurs in Antiquities, and that concerning James, the brother of Jesus, in the same book. Scholars are generally convinced that editors have worked over these passages. In my opinion, a reasonable position is taken by the great translator Thackeray, who holds that the passages are the work of Josephus, and that a Christian censor or copyist has made slight omissions and alterations which have distorted the original account, giving it a wholly different complexion. Josephus' account of the death of Herod Agrippa I is found in Antiquities and has often been quoted in connection with Luke's description in Acts. The two records supplement each other nicely. Well, I wonder why. Nicely, and can only be distorted interpretation by be taken as contradictory. The whole problem of Luke's dependence on Josephus cannot be discussed here because it doesn't exist. That's why. Get this, the ability of Josephus as a historian, in my opinion, does not compare favorably with Luke's ability as a historian. What? Josephus writes 5,000 pages, and Luke writes, what, a couple of books, 10 books? With the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 47 and the following years, Josephus has become once more the focus of scholarly attention. Most scholars will agree that the community that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls, located in what is now known as Qumran, was in some way closely related to the Essenes. It is well known that one of our principal sources of information concerning this sect is Josephus. Yeah, but what we're saying, Philo, he got it from Philo, but he didn't get it from Banus. But then, accordingly, Josephus has been studied in fine detail for any clues that might shed further light on the Qumran community. Josephus made use of other sources when he wrote about the Essenes. Huh? Well, why didn't he just ask Banus? Why didn't he get his source from Banus? He knew an Essene, didn't he? He hung out with him for 3 years. He does not exhibit the first-hand knowledge in this area that he does, for example, in describing the Jewish wars. Well, he had Banus. He was with Banus for 3 years. Or am I missing something here? Oh, this is beautiful here. This has therefore forced all of us who have worked in, let's go to the next page, the subject, to handle Josephus with great caution. You gotta have some fun with this. You gotta have some fun with it. How come all these scholars missed that? They didn't read the foreword. Josephus may have given us a distorted picture of the Essenes. reflecting inaccuracies which he found in Philo. Because see, Philo's, it's the same deal with Philo. So many inaccuracies, so many things wrong in Philo. Perhaps a combination of these factors should be considered. It seems reasonable to conclude that the continuing story of Josephus and the Dead Sea Scrolls will clarify many points in both bodies of writing. I doubt that very seriously. I'm going to scroll on down here. It's just talking about some more stuff here. Best text is, will not equip the translator accordingly. The work has many deficiencies. Now we're going to jump into the introduction by Henry Stebbing, Doctor of Divinity. Let's go scroll down here. It was therefore originally written in Syro-Chaldaic, which is basically a dialect of Aramaic. No big deal there. Coming down to the bottom here, the real defects of his work, moreover, were not such as, next page, could be readily detected by popular readers. They consisted chiefly of errors in the early part of the narrative and were confined to a period of their history, the interest of which would be greatly diminished by the awful grandeur of that which described the fall of the Commonwealth. This is cute. He was Josephus, evidently ambitious of imitating the celebrated classical historians. Oh, he was wanting to be imitated, but he wrote like 10 times more than they did, and of relating the events so dear to the memory of his people. There was one grand and authoritative source of information. It bore the seal of divine inspiration. It's called the Bible, God's dealings with his people. To the primary fountain of information, honest historian must necessarily have turned with profound reverence. From this, he must have felt it his duty to draw the most important parts of his narrative, nor could he regard it as allowable, should have supposed, to place any other source of intelligence in competition with one so superior to the ordinary foundations of historical truth. In order to effect this, he deemed it necessary to modify certain parts of his narrative, lest the naked facts might strengthen rather than ally the prejudices which it was his object to overcome. Such, at least, is one of the supposed reasons for those discrepancies which exist between the history of Josephus and that of Scripture. That he was justified in even the minutest departure, the plain statements of the Bible, few believers in Revelation would venture to assert. But he has had many apologists, and it has been suggested that in his time there were other sacred books existing besides those received into the canon of Scripture, and which, though not of equal authority, were notwithstanding held in great reverence by his people. That it is not known whether he took his authority, the original text of the Hebrew Bible, but it didn't exist then. It didn't exist. It has been thought by some that he might frequently write from mere memory. Okay, that's a big sentence right there. So out of 2,500 pages of ancient text, and whatever he was writing on, sheepskin, papyrus, whatever. I don't guess it could have been, it would have had to have been papyrus. How many of his 2,500 pages were from mere memory? This could only be excused on the supposition that he could, next page, not at times get access to the necessary documents, a notion which seems plainly contradicted by the fact that he was the keeper of the sacred books, the possession of which have enabled him readily to correct any error admitted into the first impression of his work. Whoo! Which might have prevented those discrepancies and therefore errors to be found in his antiquities. But if all his errors, I do not speak of those in which he departs from Scripture, and for which he cannot be excused. It gets better. Were put together, they would scarcely amount to 100th part of those admitted by Eusebius alone, either into his chronicle or other portions of his work. Such discrepancies. But for the variations in Josephus, he might imperceptibly have been set up as equal to writers chosen by God to describe his ways and doings. Wholly different. That we may most readily find the cause of the errors with which his work may be fairly charged. He paraphrased and adorned the general statements of facts, not with the desire of falsifying. What? But by yielding to his literary taste. Well, I like it. I like it here, so I'm just going to over-dramatize it, make it false. And, yeah, just you have to think while you're reading this. He fears lest the mode of his relating the facts should be wanting in earnestness and dignity. They have appeared to him bright and noble under the shining light of his own imagination. And he easily yields to flattering suggestion that by its use he may make the record. That he was not ignorant of the importance of fidelity as the first characteristic of a good historian is evident from his own remarks. Whew. You can't make this up. Next page. He says, I have a mind to say a few things to Justus, who hath himself written a history concerning these affairs, as also to others who profess to write history, but have little regard to truth, and are not afraid either out of ill will or goodwill to some persons to relate falsehoods. That's Josephus talking there. Now as to myself, I have so described these matters as I found them, and read them. This is good. His faults may therefore fairly be ascribed to somewhat of timidity on the one side and of literary vanity on the other. Most of his errors with which he has been charged are clearly referable to these sources. Of the others which cannot be so accounted for, there are some that appear to have originated in the different opinions which prevailed among his people of his time, and through no small obscurity over portions of Scripture narrative, while the remainder, whether omissions or statements plainly opposed to the inspired history, must be left without conjecture, and are better disposed of by the acknowledgement that such discrepancies cannot be accounted for, unless by suppositions which involve us in new difficulties. And it talks about some of the other historians that his critics, and these guys lived like in the 1600s or so. They lived way on down the line. He, Josephus, changes. He adds, he suppresses circumstances. In a word, he puts himself in opposition to Moses in such a manner that one of them must be a false historian. Can it be any more plain than that? That the next step would be the annihilation of history altogether. Human error will be introduced in greater or less proportions. There will accordingly be discrepancies. Occasional contradictions, yeah. Dozens and dozens of them? I don't know. So there you go. Now let's look at some more. Now this comes from page 22 of the same book, and this is the classic portrait of Flavius Josephus. You see his name right here. And if you go online today and you type in Flavius Josephus, you get all kinds of pictures. You get all kinds of pictures of him here in full color. Here he is here, here he is here. Oh, you know, there's kind of like very similar, but here, what? Here's the coins. Here he is in color. Here he is in full color here. Here, he's in full color. Here's in black and white, and this is a little different. Oh man, look at that. That's just gorgeous. But my goodness, he's everywhere. he's a pop star, but no, wait, what? No, look at that. Right there. This picture don't look like him. I'm calling that out. Flavius Josephus never existed. What? There it is. Right here. Flavius Josephus never existed. This guy here's trying to steal my thunder. To make the claim the writer existed. What? I was first. I did this 30 years ago. And now this guy's, he's stealing my thunder. And he doesn't even use a classical Josephus picture portrait. Here we have volume 10 of Encyclopedia Judaica. And Josephus starts on page 251. And you see some highlighted points in here. And we're going to look at some of these highlighted points. What I'm showing you now comes from volume 10, Encyclopedia Judaica, page 255. Principles professed by Josephus and defects in the work. What? Let's scroll on down here. There is no hint of his incompetence on the battlefield, and instead there is boasting based on obvious lies. I'm not making it up. This is in Judaica. Don't make up anything when it comes to Judaica. You don't make up anything. But every historical fact likely to support this view is deliberately omitted by Josephus. Talking about Tacitus here. Just scroll on down, let you look at some more of that. This comes from page 256. It's literal and historiographic at value. These defects naturally diminish the value of Josephus's work as history in this respect. It must be treated with considerable caution. This comes from page 258. And you see, these, including such writers such as this guy. These guys have, some of them have only like a couple of sentences concerning a character from the Bible. Just one or two, or a name mention or something. They're not like, okay, Manetto mentions a little bit about Moses. There are divergent views on the sources of Josephus's information, some maintaining that he had read the authors in the original, others that he had only an indirect acquaintance with them. And, it's talking about Berosus and Alexander Polyhistor, which is kind of a new guy, and his stuff is quite obscure. Now, when I was reading Strabo, well, I've read Strabo several times, I logged in Strabo probably between 100 and 150 ancient historians that their works are completely lost. There's nothing of them. And in here, you might as well throw in Harmonius of Galilee. Some of these guys are so obscure. And you have Harmonius of Galilee. Even in a version significantly different than the existing one. The Septuagint of today is quite, I have big problems with it. As stated, Josephus' first work was written in Aramaic and only later, at the request of the imperial court, in Greek. This comes from page 259. Josephus' lack of awareness of the contradiction attests to his weakness as a historian. He was guilty of inaccuracy, and many passages indicate that his critical sense was not highly developed. He was stupid. But he wrote, what, thousands of pages of stuff. Porphyry's another one. Now we're looking at a passage from page 263, volume 10, Judaica. As a historian, not so. However, is his merit as a historian. Josephus is, of course, not to be judged according to the criteria of a modern historian, which we don't have modern historians. You're listening to it. I am a modern historian, but there's not very many of us at all. The expression historical science does not apply to ancient historiography. Well, it does to everybody else. For in ancient times, the historian was a writer and his craft part of a general literature. This aspiration of the historian proved his misfortune, since the requirements of a literature did not accord with the demands of a historiography, and most often the writer prevailed over the historian. Josephus shared all the defects that characterize contemporary and earlier historians. Whoo! And that will conclude what I have to show you concerning the amazing character of Josephus. And now, in the same volume of Judaica, on 296, we begin Jossipon. Jossipon, because you can't have Josephus without Jossipon. And I'm sure a lot of people have never even heard of this character here before, because they haven't done their homework. But we're going to look at all this highlighted marks here. We've got a lot to check out here. I'm going to try to do as thorough and a job on this as I possibly can. Now we're picking up with page 296, volume 10, Encyclopedia Judaica, Jossipon. Historical narrative in Hebrew. So you know it's got to be Middle Ages of anonymous authorship. Well, then why are we calling it Jossipon? Describing the period of the Second Temple, which is like 6th century BC up to 70 AD. The author starts his narrative by listing the different nations of the settlement. It's all done in southern Italy in Hebrew. That's a little screwy right there for me. The author proceeds to recount the history of ancient Italy. The book, like Josephus's The War, ends with the fall of Masada. Proves it. That backs it up. That backs Jossipon backs Josephus up, and Josephus backs up Jossipon. The author states that the Hungarians, the Bulgarians, and the Pechenegs, have you ever heard of those guys before? Dwelt on the great river called the Danube after 900 CE. I call CE the Christian era. In one of the manuscripts of Jossipon, the precise date of the book is given, and we wrote from the book of Joseph Ben Gurion HaKohen. Now he's calling Josephus Joseph Ben Gurion, but that's the wrong name. It's the wrong name. In the year 885 AD, Christian era. All signs point to the fact that the Hebrew book was written in southern Italy, which at the time was one of the important centers. The author's place of birth was part of the Byzantine Empire, where the official language was Greek. So he grew up where it was Greek, but he didn't know how to write it. He didn't know how to read it and write it. He could only speak it. But he also knew Latin and Hebrew. Are we catching this? I hope so. I hope so. Let's clear it up. Page 297. The author, however, could not read Greek, only Latin. But evidently he could read Hebrew too. He was writing in it. He's writing in Hebrew, so couldn't he also read? I'm just saying. The main source of Jossipon was a Latin manuscript which included 16 of the 20 books of Josephus, his Antiquities, and the Latin adaptation of the War. The latter was written in the second half of the 4th century AD. Well, how do you know? And called the Josephus. The author of Jossipon also knew random facts from the war itself, with which he was acquainted only incidentally. He knew also about the against Appian of Josephus. The author calls Josephus Joseph Ben Gurion, like I mentioned, although Josephus' father was called Matthias. He was misled by the inaccurate language of the Josephus, and he identified Josephus with Joseph Ben Gurion, who had also been a general in the war against the Romans. The author's second important source was the Latin version of the Apocrypha, and that had to come from the Catholics. The remainder of his secular sources were various medieval chronicles. Of course, from these he mainly gained information concerning the Gentile kingdoms. He had, of course, a certain knowledge of Talmudic literature. But he only could read Latin, but no, he also could read Hebrew. but his main sources were Latin. Considering the period in which he lived, the author was a gifted historian, aware of his responsibilities and endowed with excellent historical insight. Fables drawn from obscure sources are only rarely found in his book, mainly in the chapters dealing with the ancient history of Italy. The author also had great literary gifts. His narrative is filled with national pride and is written in an excellent biblical Hebrew style. In the Middle Ages, the book was already called Jossipon, as a book of Josephus. This is the Jewish Greek form of Josephus. In the original version found preserved in manuscripts, the author speaks in the first person and defines the purpose of his writing thus: I have collected stories from the book of Joseph Ben Gurion and from the books of other authors who wrote down the deeds of our ancestors, and I compiled them into one scroll. So he can't even get his source's name right, but he's brilliant. He's a writer of the. He gets so he can't even recollect who he's Since the name of the author was not known, the book was ascribed by the time of Rashi to Josephus himself. And the time of Rashi was 1040 to 1105 AD. Its author restyled the book ascribed to it to Joseph Ben Gurion and added fictitious elements. But he's such a good writer. He's so good. Although he himself was lacking neither in religious nor in secular knowledge. The most famous among the passages to be found in the expanded version is a fictitious description. The most famous passage is a fictitious description. Okay, you go figure, of the crowning of Vespasian in Rome. This was written under the influence of the crowning of the emperors in Rome during the Middle Ages, probably the influence of drugs. Today, the book is known to the reader in this rewritten and popular version. Another early version of Jossipon is that of the Mantua. Well, if it's so popular, how come they're so... Where can you go to get one today? And I wonder, it's clearly a PSEUDEPIGRAPHA. In this edition, all reference to Joseph Ben Gurion as the author has been omitted. As we cleaned it up, we've sanitized it. The original form and the true character of the book of Jossipon can therefore be known only from manuscripts. In one of these appears the date of composition. Gershom probably copied Jossipon to use as a textbook on the history of this religion. During the Middle Ages, Jossipon served as a source of information about the period of the later books of the Bible, such as the books of Esther and Daniel. And I destroyed the book of Esther back in 1991. When I destroy a book, like I'm destroying a couple of other authors here, I leave no room to turn either way. I destroyed the book of Esther. It is complete garbage. This is the reason that Bible and Talmud commentators frequently quoted it during the Middle Ages. Next page, 298. I'm going to wrap it up here. The book of Jossipon attained great importance during the Middle Ages. Where are they? For instance, a passage on Alexander the Great translated from it appeared in the early Russian chronicle of Nestor, without mentioning the source. The book is referred to by name, however, by the Arab scholar Ibn Hazm, who died in 1063. The importance attached to the book stemmed from its ascription to Josephus. An Arabic translation of Jossipon by a Yemenite was probably in existence already in the 11th century. From Arabic, it was translated into Ethiopian. Okay, so now it's in Latin, it's in Hebrew, it's in Greek, it's in Arabic, Ethiopian. Okay, where else? Translations into European languages such as Latin, English, Czech, Polish, and Russian were generally made from printed editions. The author of the book of Jossipon, following his sources, mentions John the Baptist, but he refers neither to Jesus nor to the beginnings of Christianity. Brief mention of Jesus is made in the manuscript of the expanded version of Jossipon. Well, yeah, but it's loaded with fiction, isn't it? Jossipon's relationship, or lack of relationship, towards Christianity interested both Muslims and Christians. From the age of humanism, leading Christian humanists discussed the question of whether the book of Jossipon had really been composed by Josephus. The book was also known to the Karaites. That's an interesting group of people there. And in a Samaritan chronicle written in Arabic, Josipon's account of Alexander the Great's visit to Jerusalem is included. But it's a funny thing, it's not included in any of the annals of Alexander the Great's other authors. The place of the visit was changed. Yeah, a short Hebrew narrative translated from Greek was inserted into some versions of Jossipon. Well, yeah, just take your pick, just put this in there, interpolate it however you want. The narrative is an abridgment of a legend about Alexander the Great ascribed to Callisthenes and an anonymous Greek Byzantine chronicle on the period from Alexander to Tiberius. The important narrative has been preserved independently in one manuscript. What I'm saying is, all of these are pseudepigraphas, and they're all from the Middle Ages. They are just concocted out of thin air. Now, Zondervan should be putting out Jossipon. I wonder if you go now. Years ago, you couldn't get Jossipon. I bet you can now. And with the Dead Sea Scrolls coming back on the scene, that really became another cash cow for Zondervan selling Josephus books. A lot of people start buying them. This is my last journey down the excrement train, and this is something I've wanted to touch on. And so many people asked me and Paul to look at this. Oh, you guys need to do a translation of this. Okay, here we have the emerald tablets. Here they're emerald tablets. There's two of them now. And, well, it depends on, legendary emerald tablets. And this is the emerald, they're all over the place except in anybody's firm hand. And so, it's just that, and I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. You're going to say, well, Harry, you and Paul, you guys just don't get it. You guys just don't get it. And here we are on the Google. People ask, do the emerald tablets really exist? Certainly no such tablet has ever been found. The text purported to be from the emerald tablet does exist. Its earliest source is an Arabic text from the 6th century A.D. Okay. Arab text from the 6th century A.D. But now you come down here. Who translated the emerald tablets with an S? Dr. Michael Dorrell. Now he's got a book on it. Their antiquity is stupendous, dating back some 36,000 years B.C. The author is Thoth or Toth, whatever you want to call it. He wrote the emerald tablets in his native Atlantean language. So are they Atlantean or are they Arabic? I'm just curious. Well, let's see what it says about Wikipedia. Now, I have been saying for a long time that these tablets do not exist. Number one, there's no way anybody's going to carve letters on a piece of emerald. It's just really, really tough on the Mohs scale. You can't scratch it. It's hard enough just to grind it to make it faceted. And there's just no way that anybody's going to make a carving on emerald. It just ain't going to happen. Now here in Wikipedia, you see this, an imaginative 17th century depiction of the emerald tablet from 1606. I'd like to see if that's for real. Where is it actually at? Oh, it's in some museum somewhere. Yeah. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. And textual history. Newton's translation. Oh yeah, they got this. I wonder where that book is. A 1600s, from the 1600s century. Well, what did he lift it off of? If Isaac Newton is found among the alchemical plant, okay, where did he get it from? And do we know this is for real? I don't think so. I don't think so, not for 1 second. This is all pseudo stuff. It's all pseudo stuff. Latin text. Well, is it Latin? Is it Arabic? Or is it Atlantean? For 1541. Oh man, yes sir, yes sir. Yeah, and I'm supposed to believe this, as much stuff as I have concerning crap online. See, once you jump on that bovine manure express train, you have to stay on it and just keep making it up as you go. Now I'm going to squeeze this in because in some of the passages I found that the emerald tablets, they are in the Museum of London. So on the 20th of December 2020, I emailed the info at Museum of London in London. I am Harry Hubbard. I was recently informed you have in your catalog the Emerald Tablet of Thoth housed in your possession. Is this true? Do you have this famous tablet in your collection? Thank you, and please do respond, as this is important for me and my research. Have a happy holiday season. And they emailed me back. Dear Harry Hubbard, thanks for your email. This is not something held in our collections. With our best wishes, librarian. And here's my last entry. Are the Emerald Tablets of Thoth real? There's only one Emerald Tablet, and it depends on what you mean by real. Now, see what I'm saying? You have to make it up and just keep making it up. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if in another 10, 15 years that they don't have the Emerald Tablet of Thoth, the text, found just all of a sudden in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because it all goes hand in hand. Once you buy into this Emerald Tablets, you're going to have to believe that the book of Enoch is for real, that Josephus is for real, that the Dead Sea Scrolls are all for real, and they're all just a bunch of bovine manure. Straight up. Sorry. Can't help you out. And so everybody, all you people that want me and Paul Lee, just stop sending me the emails and the pictures and everything on Facebook. I don't want them. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention.